Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Application Migrations, a technical deep dive with AWS. We'll be getting started here in just a couple of minutes, so we'll let people trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right, everybody, we're going to give people just about 60 more seconds to sign in, and then we'll get started with today's webinar. Again, thank you for attending. All right, welcome to today's webinar, Application Migrations, a technical deep dive with AWS. I am Jay Martin, your host for the next hour. Certainly, if you have any questions throughout today's presentation, please add them to the Q&A section on the right side of your screen, and our team of experts will do their best to answer each before the end of the webinar. We are extremely blessed with the presence of great minds today, including Jonathan Trellis and Sid Mehta from Amazon Web Services, as well as Ed Ip, one of our fine solutions architects at ClearScale. Before we begin, I'll pass it over to Jonathan and Sid so they can introduce themselves, as well as give a brief overview of this AWS I keep hearing so much about. John?
Great. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to join us today. We look forward to the webinar and the information that we're going to be sharing with you today. My name is Jonathan Trellis. I'm a migrations solutions architect. I'm based in the DC area, and I mainly work with customers and migration partners on implementing secure, cost-effective, and efficient cloud architectures. My team also supports the APN customer or partner network and the migration competency. I'm going to pass it over now to my colleague, Sid Mehta. Sid, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to come and attend the webinar today. This is Sid Mehta. I'm based in Seattle. I'm a partner solutions architect with AWS, and I have the opportunity of working with our North America SI partners on migration projects. I also work closely with our migration competency program, and I help partners attain the migration competency if they desire to apply for it. We've seen some significant growth in applications of the migration competency, and migrations is a very important area within AWS that me and my team have been focusing on.
Excellent. And then we have Ed Ip. Ed, if you would give a nice introduction to ClearScale and a quick overview of your role as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Ip, Solutions Architect at ClearScale. I'm based in Southern California. I primarily focus on pre-sales activities, so I work with customers to understand what their needs are and come up with the solutions to hopefully we can help them get to whatever the end goals may be. And a quick plug on ClearScale. So ClearScale is a premier tier consulting partner with AWS, which puts us in the top 3% of the AWS partner ecosystem. We have recently been awarded a 10th competency, which rounds us up to a total of 10. And in case you're not aware of the AWS competency program, it is designed to identify and validate partners with demonstrated AWS technical expertise and proven customer success in a given area. So all that is to say that we've spent a lot of time honing our craft in the areas that you see on your the right-hand side of your screen. And majority of us staff are technical in nature. We are now quickly approaching completing 1,000 projects with AWS. And we've also recently received the little badge there you see on the lower part of the screen, AWS 100 certified network, meaning that we have at least 100 individuals in the company that AWS certified and always ready to help.
Excellent. All right, well, today we have a four-pronged approach to the webinar where we'll start with Ed, who will discuss the MRA and MRP process, as well as walk us through some of the common migration stages. And then we'll explore the recently updated 7 Rs with Sid, and finally do a deep dive into application migration with Jonathan. So Ed, if you would be so kind to please take us through the MRA and MRP.
Yeah, absolutely. So anytime we think about migration, we start thinking about the idea that we need to understand where you are, and then we need to plan for success. So of the 3 stages that, of the 3 phases of migration, the first one is migration readiness assessment. It determines, assess the current state of your migration readiness and identifies your organization's strengths and weaknesses. The MRA is based on the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, or CAF, or CAF, and it evaluates your cloud readiness along 8 dimensions. And they are landing zone, operating model, security, compliance, migration process experience, skills and center of excellence, migration plan, and business plan. At the end of this process, you'll receive, or together you will have a report that shows where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, as well as any action items and when we need to take care of them. And then the next phase of the migration planning is the migration readiness and planning phase, or MRP. So, when you start talking about migration, you're going to hear MRA and MRP a lot. Make sure you understand what they are and why they're important. And the second phase is the migration readiness planning, or MRP, and it is to prepare a cloud operational foundation so that you can support the workloads once they're in the cloud. If you are currently on premise, there are a lot of things that may not directly map to the cloud. So that's kind of what the purpose of the MRP is, to get your team ready to support the workload. So for the MRP, you follow an agile approach where go through sprints, and there'll be a number of work streams that are specific to help your team be ready for the cloud, to operate in the cloud. So some of the work streams are help you create design a center of excellence, create a landing zone, your operating model, and then figured out what your security and compliance needs are, so that we can build you for success. And the main objectives of the MRP is prepare your organization to operate in the cloud, develop strong migration plan, build a compelling business case. We see that there's some companies that has the desire to migrate, but they may not necessarily have financial support all the way to the top. And this will help you build that business case to say, if we do this, at the end of the process, this is what we're spending. This is how much less we'll be spending when we get there. Establish total cost of ownership, and then establish return on investment, so your financial leadership can see why you want to do this. And within the MRP, we'll also identify or group your applications into what I call migration patterns, which is that if we know and have migrated, let's say 2 or 3 patterns, and if all your applications fit in those patterns, once we do that, once we're able to do that and document how we do that, the next phase after MRP is migration at scale. We can just go at speed because we've already done it. We know exactly how to do it. We don't have to think about it anymore, and we can migrate at speed. Next slide. Okay, so the various migration stages. Discover, we want to understand what the business constraints are for the applications, and capture and document those constraints. Design, we want to design the future state architecture, we're clear plan on how we plan on migrating and cut over. Build, applications is moved to the AWS. How we planning on doing that? We're going to replatform. We're going to re-architect. We're going to refactor. And Jonathan and Sid will talk more about that in a little bit. And integrate. How do you continue to operate your workload with the tools that you already have? Maybe you need some external, or maybe you need some new tools to operate your new workloads in the cloud. And validate. Make sure what we've migrated still works as expected, as performant, if not more performant than what you had on premise. And then lastly, cutover. Users are, once everything it's in AWS and it's tested, it's validated, it's ready to go, users are redirected to new applications in the AWS and prior to you decommissioning your existing infrastructure. So it looks like we're...
Yes, that brings us to our first poll of the day. Where are you in the migration process? And so if you'll just kind of let us know, that'll certainly set up a framework for the discussion later on. But we'd love to get your responses. All right, seeing some of the results come in now. It looks like we're kind of all over the map, which is always great and pretty common in these webinars. Whether it's some that need to optimize or some that are still in the assessment phase. But it looks like everybody is at least part of kind of a migration path at this point. I'll leave the poll open for another couple minutes to let some results trickle in. But now that we have gone through the MRA and MRP process, we'd love to understand the 7 R's of migration. So Sid, if you'd please walk us through the 7 R's.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we've gone through the assess phase. We've identified some business drivers for the migration. Oftentimes than not, we see it's reducing total cost of ownership, but it's obviously done through different ways, whether you want to improve agility, you want to improve your resilience of the application once it's migrated to the cloud, or you're just looking to move away from undifferentiated heavy lifting tasks and improve your IT productivity. So this is where the 7 R's come into play. And we used to have the 6R framework for a long time until we recently added relocate using VMware, which is our 7th R. So what this does is, as you go along your migration journey, complete your discovery, get answers about the questions that you have around your application dependency, comes a time where you have to determine, how am I going to relocate or rehost or replatform my application? What is the best way for me to get there? What are the pros and cons, right? So relocate allows you to basically take your VMware instances and migrate them to AWS using our software-defined data center that's hosted by VMware in your AWS account. So if you have vSphere 6.0 or vSphere 6.5 in your on-prem data center, you could either do cold migration or hybrid link mode to vMotion your instances over to one of the 16 supported regions on the AWS cloud. Some of the benefits of this approach here is with vSphere 6.5, you can essentially have a single pane of glass that lets you move your instances between multi-clouds or between your on-premise and AWS. So very popular approach we've seen, especially for organizations that are heavily using VMware already to host their VMs. One of the other application migration strategies that's extremely popular is rehosting, which is sometimes also known as our lift and shift strategy. What you're really doing here is you're taking the operating system that's running your application, and you're going to move it off of your existing hypervisor and put it on top of EC2. So there are a lot of tools available to automate the migration for you, and there are some that are available. If you're taking this approach, you do it manually first at least, and go through the install, config, and deploy steps. So you can clearly see what's happening along the way. This is a quick deep dive into our rehosting strategy, as we can look at here. We've got tools like AWS Server Migration Service, which can help you create AMIs in your target region using the instances that you have on-prem. Or you can use tools like Cloud Endure, which is an AWS tool at no additional cost to do block level replication and migrate your servers over to your target region. Or there are other partner tools that you can even get from AWS Marketplace to achieve the same outcomes around rehosting. I think as of December last year, December 2019, we've migrated over 750,000 servers using the rehosting approach. Another strategy that we often see customers leveraging and is extremely popular is replatforming. So replatforming is where you're now taking the application itself on your existing instances and migrating the application onto a new platform in AWS. So there can be two ways of looking at this. Right here, we can look at your instances in your on-premise data center, and there's applications running on it. What we could do is start out by creating a golden AMI in your target region. Oftentimes than not, it's always advisable to keep this AMI very similar to what you already have running in your on-premise data center. So let's say if you've got a certain version of Linux that is already running in your on-premise data center, you probably want to keep the same version and the same kernel for maximum compatibility. And you can then migrate your application over to the target region. You can leverage tools from AWS like OpsWorks and actually use some of the automation available through Chef or Puppet to install, configure, and validate your applications once they're migrated over to AWS. So this is an example where you can think of an Oracle WebLogic application, maybe that you have running on your on-premises data center, and you want to migrate it to Tomcat, and you could use an approach like this. We also have the ability to replatform databases. So there can be a variety of databases that you may have in your on-premise data center. And this is where you would go ahead and leverage a service like DMS. We also have DMS plus schema conversion tool, the SCT tool. So depending on whether you're doing homogeneous migration of your database, moving Oracle to Oracle on RDS, that's something you can do with DMS. Or if you wanted to migrate to, let's say, DynamoDB or Amazon Redshift, you can use the DMS tool along with schema conversion to actually do a heterogeneous migration into your target region. You definitely want to be mindful if you have extremely large databases that are going through your direct connect, and you don't want to really saturate your VPN connections or your direct connect links with the migration, the volume that's going through here. So we do have an offering with the AWS Snowball Edge, which can take large amounts of data from your on-premises data center. You can actually encrypt them with KMS keys without the keys being stored on the device, and then it can be shipped to the region of your choice, and it integrates with our DMS service, so you can actually complete the conversion in the region after you've shipped the data as well. So this is an extremely popular way of migrating databases from on-prem to AWS. We also have another option, where we oftentimes when you have conversations with, let's say the leaders of an organization or even the COE leaders within an organization, it comes down to what is the core, of core business apps, and what does this organization really want to achieve? Do they want to use their dev capacity and their resources to build features that are going to make them stand out? Or do you really want to spend a whole lot of time, managing software from vendors, patching and doing some of that undifferentiated heavy lifting and deal with that ongoing cost? So if there are applications that aren't necessarily core to your business, as you migrate your applications, you can look at repurchasing, some applications that are out there in AWS and move away from actually managing EC2 instances or actually patching the software or installing it. So AWS Marketplace can offer a variety of options when you're looking to purchase. You can purchase AMIs for specific OSs. You can go directly and, let's say, modernize your CRM tool by moving away from something that you may have implemented in-house and implement one that's available from the marketplace, turnkey, and then managed by the software provider themselves. So you can focus more on your business processes and your workflows as opposed to the patching and the install and the upgrade paths and staying current. Another option here that we have in ours is refactoring. And I think we're going to do a deeper dive later on today with the refactoring as well. It's very this is pretty much what we hear when I go and talk to customers who are thinking about moving to AWS. I mean, they're always thinking DevOps. They want their teams to be DevOps. They want to take away some of these monolithic applications that may be hard to maintain, are extremely difficult to maybe add new features to, and they don't see a clear strategy for actually upgrading them. And really what they want to do is they want to refactor these applications, break them down into microservices, add some kind of API gateways, and have them all, pretty much, if possible, go serverless or use DynamoDB for our sub-second latency, etc. So it is an extremely powerful strategy. But when you are refactoring, I would say you just need to be mindful of the time it can take to refactor these applications, and also, what are you refactoring? If you're refactoring applications that are core to your business, and you see yourself needing updates to them all the time, and that agility is really going to help you in the long run, absolutely go for it. Basically, you could take a traditional application that you have, could be a mainframe based application, could be some other applications that are harder to migrate, and you can actually allocate your resources, your dev teams, and start looking at how you want to split it down into microservices. You can leverage Lambda, DynamoDB. You can leverage IoT if you have a lot of sensors that are supplying data to your application, and start using a lot of our managed services and go serverless with it. But this is one thing is the investment in time here is something to be mindful of, and maybe setting some kind of durations to see whether you are successful within a given time. If not, you have to really start looking at a balance of other strategies that you can also leverage to achieve your overall migration goals. And what about retain or move, right? So there are customers who are, let's say, looking to get out of a data center and completely evacuate the data center. So there are options for them to either look at colo or our direct connect partners, where they actually physically move their hosts over, from their premises to one of our direct connect partners, and that gives them the ability to still connect with AWS regions with minimal latency and still operate their workloads the way they're operating today in their data center, but actually now they can go with the managed service provision, from our colo partners. So that allows them the option to retain their applications the way they are, but actually just migrate to a different data center that will let them eventually migrate or modernize their application with add-on AWS services, should they decide to go forward with that. And then we've got retire and decommission as our 7th R. What we really look at here is there oftentimes, when you start interviewing the application teams, there will be a lot of servers that are not heavily utilized. You start looking at these utilization numbers and the applications that are running, and what we know are commonly called them in our discovery tool is a zombie server, basically. So there are zombies, and it's close to 20-30% of large organizations have zombie servers that were probably used at some point and now being retained for spare capacity in the future. So if there is a way for us to go ahead and retire those applications when we're building our migration plans, that's definitely going to allow them to go ahead and reduce those big expenses that may be brewing up, just to refresh these environments in the future. And then with AWS, they have the ability to scale up their applications as they need, or be more elastic. So we do have the 7 R's here that we've just looked at. What I wanted to do now was just to take a quick look at the mix. So I often get asked is, when I'm doing a migration, which of the 7 R's should I be looking at, and how do I decide, right? Where do I want to go? So it really depends on the business goals, and it really depends on what the timeline is and what the goal is. So if you want to look at reducing cost, and if you've already decided that you're going to save 30%, 40% just by operating your workloads in AWS, by doing some kind of right sizing and right pricing with the various pricing models that we have in AWS, you know that migrating to AWS is where your benefits start to come in right away. So when you have a migration project, you really want to make sure that you have KPIs that you're always tracking in terms of momentum and completing application migrations. Because once you have uh, you know identified the applications that are probably at most risk, and allocated the right strategy that will let you achieve the migration in a set amount of time, it helps you build momentum, and actually the highly dependent applications, you can start seeing a path for them to work in AWS as well. So it's, Replatform, as we know, will take away a lot of the heavy lifting for managing databases on premise, and instead move them to RDS. And you can have RDS SQL Server, you can already have RDS MySQL, whatever it is, and actually save yourself some total cost of ownership just in terms of hosting and maintaining the application. But it's rehosting, which is where you are have the most speed, And as you go with complexity of refactoring, you definitely are open to gaining more and more from the resiliency, from the cost of Lambda, and it is likely that your application is going to cost a lot less to run once they're refactored to managed services, or you go serverless. But you just have to account for the time it takes to refactor it when you're dealing with the migration project. So with this, it just doesn't mean that we don't see a lot of refactoring. We do see it, but we often see customers go through with migration first, using our relocate strategy, the rehost, and the replatform. And then once they are migrated there, they have the ability to refactor those workloads and keep modernizing those workloads at a better rate. So with that, I just want to end on a note where you have a lot of different strategies. Some of the strategies have more complexity. Some strategies are going to give you more speed, and it just depends on your timelines, your goals, and the problems that you're trying to resolve. So because you find a strategy that works, but it may not be perfect in terms of what you want your end state to look like. Doesn't mean you want to discount that strategy today, especially if it lets you have the agility, of actually migrating today and then modernizing later. So think of the whole project as something that you can split in two phases. Think of migration first and focus on your migration speed, and you can always modernize your applications once you're in AWS, because you'll have a lot of tools at your disposal, whether you want to do add-on services, which we see very often, or you want to completely refactor your applications. So those are just some thoughts that I want to leave you with here as I hand the ball over to Jonathan for a deep dive.
Awesome. Thank you, Sid, for the great overview of the 7 Rs. Yeah, so now that we talked about the 7 Rs, we actually went over some of the use cases for each one of those. Let's actually deep dive into the actual strategies, and we're going to concentrate on Rehost, Replatform, and Refactor, just to compare the three and go over the benefits of each one of those. So now that we made the decision to move, right? The question of the hour is, what is the most effective way to do it, right? That's why a good discovery phase addressing the business and technical perspectives of the organization is very important. I think Ed covered this in the beginning, explaining how discovery and planning is a dimension of MRP, or migration readiness and planning. So the goal is to answer the question, what is it that I need to do to identify a pattern for my application? So the 7 Rs specify a path for all the applications that you could potentially migrate, right? Based on complexity, dependency, criticality, business impact, and whatnot. So pretty much all the components that we talked about before. Rehost or lift and shift, you can think of that as like an easy transition or like an easy button to quickly migrate to the cloud. Think of it as using an automated tool like Cloud Endure or our SMS, server migration service, to replicate or snapshot a virtual server on premise to the cloud. And for some companies or organizations, that's great, because all they want to do is they actually want to transition to the cloud as quickly as possible, and they don't want to go through architecting code or deploying new environments, which could potentially add more complexity to it. But we have to keep in mind that a potential downside of that is that we could be transferring some of the inefficiencies that are going in your environments. So perhaps rehosting could be a detriment, since we're not going to learn the application per se. We're actually transferring the infrastructure as the baseline with the application on top of that. So usually with traditional environments, as you know, we purchase the servers, the hardware with CPU and memory capacity, and that becomes our upper limit, right? So we purchase a set of servers with X amount of CPU and memory, and we tend to allocate resources based on that capacity. There is no mechanism to descope or downsize those virtual machines when they're not being utilized. So we tend to lift and shift that mentality, because we're translating that VM, that particular machine with that capacity, into an EC2 instance type when we do lift and shift. That's why optimizing the workload for cost and performance is very important. But what if we have a use case where the customer has to get out of the data center, in the fastest and most cost-efficient way? Then in this case, Rehost would be the best fit, and it'll make more sense. But in terms of effort and business value, you can see that Rehost and Replatform have the least level of effort and the least time to migrate. So we can see that here. In the chart, right? Time to migrate and the cost and effort and skills to accomplish that task or that migration endeavor. But on the other hand, with Refactor that you see on the upper right, that's where we're actually going to see more business value added. However, the level of effort and the time to migrate will increase, as we can see from the visual there. Having that said, an application can be migrated in more than one way. You could potentially rehost an application, move the Windows or Linux machine the way it is, and rehost it. You could replatform that, and perhaps if it's a SQL server, maybe use RDS to do the replatform, and refactor that could be transitioning that monolith application stack into more of a serverless or microservices pipeline with maybe Lambda, API Gateway, and DynamoDB. So the complexity is going to increase based on the actual path that we take, and the benefit to the business as well. So as you begin to assess the migration path one by one, we have to make sure that we assess the level of effort, the cost associated to taking that migration approach, and the overall benefit to the business. So that's going to help us determine the best migration strategy for that particular workload or application. The other aspect is the time to migrate that you see here at the bottom. The smaller the duration of that application migration itself, the more benefit you're going to see, right? Because we're going to transition to the cloud in the most efficient way to get that quick win, right? To migrate, and the longer the migration phase, it's going to be, the less value we're going to get because we are operating, at least two environments. So we could be dealing with cost for infrastructure, licensing, and the actual people, the workforce operating both environments concurrently. That's also something that we have to keep in mind. So based on that, we can assess that each migration approach is could be beneficial depending on the use case. But let's go ahead and deep dive into the last two, Replatform and Refactor. So let's get into that. So with Replatform, this is where we see customers that want to go beyond the lift and shift model, right? I don't want to continue replicating that, VMware capacity into EC2. I actually want to maybe leverage more cloud-native platforms, and we see that happening because of three main drivers. And number one is the actual ability to scale increases when we actually leverage Replatform capabilities. Number two is that increasing the reliability and resilience to ensure that the key business services are actually available at a greater level of velocity than the current state. And the last key driver that we see is that customers take advantage of the AWS shared responsibility model, where the customer is responsible for security in the cloud, and AWS will take the responsibility off the cloud, right? So that's also a great benefit or a business driver for embracing a replatform strategy. We also get the chance here to make some changes at to the actual platform, but at the end of the day, the architecture is going to remain the same. Hypothetically speaking, if we actually take a three-tier architecture on premise, right? We have a Windows stack, an application stack, and a database stack. We could easily replatform each stack individually. For example, migrating a Windows 2012 set of servers to 2019, and then updating the connection string to connect to a backend, RDS database. That's one way to tackle this, stack by stack or application by application. But as you can see, if we get the mental model of doing that, one thing about Replatform is that we start to introduce the concept of additional time, right? So that's something that we have to keep in mind when we take a Replatform approach. Let's go over some of the benefits and also disadvantages of running Replatform. The first thing that we can think of is, you get to use some of the managed services provided by AWS. So in the example of RDS, like we mentioned before, you transfer that management overhead to AWS. So we'll be taking care of the operating system, the replication, the failover, depending on the actual, RPO, RTO requirements of that customer. We can easily architect that solution to be, to actually meet the requirements of the RPO, RTO, since you're going to be transferring that responsibility to AWS by implementing a replatform model. The other aspect of this is that there is not really a dependency on the operating system or hypervisor or the actual underlying physical platform. All you have to do is kind of bring the binaries for the application and the database files, whether you back it up and restore it or transfer that through our tools. And we offer tools like Database Migration Service or DMS and Schema Conversion Tool or SCT that can actually help you in automating that process or those replatform activities. The last thing to cover for the advantages is that we also get a chance to migrate to a newer platform and explore that platform, operating system or database, and therefore we'll have the opportunity to utilize the new features and functionality. For example, assuming that we're running Oracle 11G on premise, and we want to move away from running that on a Windows machine, and we want to leverage RDS, we can use that. We can do that by doing a DMS migration, perhaps with SCT to help us with the schema conversion, and perhaps along the way, I do an analysis and notice that there are not that many deprecated functions between 11G and 12C for Oracle. So perhaps I get a chance to, also upgrade while I'm transitioning to a replatform model, right? So that'll be a great chance for us to address that as well and make sure that we take advantage of the replatform opportunity. When it comes to disadvantages, and Sid was indicating this before as well, it might take a lot of time if the application relies on operating system libraries or components. I used to work in public sector, and we had many Windows workloads where the .NET application had dependencies with the Microsoft component object model, or Com+, right? And that was more of a Windows dependency where .NET had to be running on Windows for that to work. So kind of removing or untangling that dependency could be very complex and very time consuming. So there are times that it makes sense to maybe explore a rehost model than replatform, but again, that depends on the complexity and the actual time that we have to migrate. And the other aspect is that we have to be aware of the cost by running both the on-premise environment and the new environment in AWS concurrently. And the last thing is that, with lift and shift, if we think of that, in a typical rehost project, the majority of the work is driven by the infrastructure teams. We're actually lifting and shifting the infrastructure the way it is, and the application is just running on top of that. And usually the application teams get engaged when the application is ported or migrated to the cloud, just to do functional testing in lift and shift. But replatform, we actually have to analyze the platform, but also the application itself to ensure that, collectively that can migrate successfully to a more native service. So that's where we see in replatform that both the applications and infrastructure teams have to work together to be successful. And that leads to additional time to plan and coordinate, because we're dealing with more than just one team or set of skill sets. Let's get into some of the best practices. And some of the things here are dependent upon the code itself. So we have to make sure that, if we're introducing additional components like load balancers or auto scaling groups, for whatever the case might be, persistence or scaling or termination of SSL, we have to ensure that our application code can support that change or that implementation. Also, whenever possible, if you can, break up each functional component and test it individually. Going back to the example before, right, of doing both an operating system upgrade and a database migration to RDS, don't combine them together, because that's going to introduce a lot of complexity. The logical way would be to tackle the database migration first, reconnect the application to the database through its connection string, and then if everything is working as expected, upgrade the operating system. All right, we're going to get into Refactor now. And the only thing that is consistent or constant with Refactor is the actual data. So we actually have room to change the rest of the things. And when I say things, we can think of, perhaps a session management or session state management for that application that was perhaps running within the code itself or within the application itself. We can transition that off to other services or systems, like maybe we can use DAX, which is DynamoDB Accelerator, if we're doing DynamoDB, right? Or maybe Elastic Cache with RDS. And we also see like extreme cases where customers transition from a monolith to a serverless pipeline with API gateway, Lambda, and DynamoDB for persistence. So in this case study, only the user data remains the same, but some of the components of the underlying code and binaries could change throughout the process. Another thing to keep in mind is that with Refactor, we see an increase in time, but also an increase in business value. So we have to assess that because we're actually using more cloud native features. We're talking about refactoring an existing application to be able to operate in AWS by taking full advantage of the platform. We see many customers refactoring because of two main reasons based on customer experience. The first reason is that Rehost or Replatform options maybe were not feasible at the time. So Refactor made more sense because the customer had more resources and time allocated to deliver that migration. And the second one is that on previously rehosted and replatform applications, maybe we have the need to now optimize that to run on cloud native services with the goal of increasing, resilience, availability, security, and scaling. So that's another aspect or another reason as to why we see customers embracing on refactoring projects. And the last thing to keep in mind is that, you have to assess the impact on your workforce because that is going to require people to do the actual work. And whether that is, within your organization or if you leverage a migration partner to do the work, eventually your organization is going to be responsible to sustain that refactored application. So the reason why this is important is because refactor takes longer and to complete and has the higher level of effort. So that's good to keep in mind. All right, let's go over some of the benefits of refactoring. So you're actually giving your application a new lifeline because you can start using more cloud native features. You can do auto scaling, failover, and whatnot to make sure that you can increase the agility and efficiency. The other benefit is that the application becomes agnostic of the platform, meaning that we don't have to be really concerned about the operating system or the hypervisor or the actual hardware. We can easily transport or port that application over, depending on how we want to run it. And that leads to the next point, which is since we don't have dependencies on the underlying platform, we get more flexibility in porting and perhaps globalizing that application. And this could be to maybe adapt to customer needs or customer requirements with the goal of enhancing their experience. Lastly, for disadvantages, Refactor could be complicated, and that is because we'll be modifying the code in binaries to run on cloud native services. And the complexity could vary, based on different aspects that we mentioned before, right? Functionality, compliance requirements, architecture, and so on. So therefore, it could become expensive and introduce a high level of effort. And then the migration timelines can also be extended due to the level of effort to migrate. Now, one thing here is that we have to make sure that Refactor doesn't become a re-engineering project that could extend the complexity and migration timelines even more. Scope it to a refactor, not a re-engineering. So not everything has to be built from scratch. And then the other recommendation is to test the current functionality and features and break them down into smaller projects if you can to make sure that we simplify the process. Now, let me actually go over the traditional architectures that we see in the cloud. So perhaps during our lift and shift or rehost project, we exposed the application through an ELB or elastic load balancer. And maybe we integrated that ELB with auto scaling groups to actually send the traffic to our fleet of EC2 instances. And maybe we're doing session affinity, sticky sessions with those load balancers. And perhaps the persistence is managed by RDS. That's the traditional, lift and shift or EC2 model in AWS. But we can take that a step further and containerize the application. We can create a container image and then store that in the Elastic Container Registry or ECR. And then we can define the container task definition to make sure that we run our container service by leveraging the ECS service. Or we can even make it all serverless by running Fargate. Let me quickly go into the drawing here. And we can keep the same backend persistence tier, with RDS for MySQL if we're doing that on the backend. So all we have to do is modify the task definition to make sure that it has the connection string to connect to that database. So that's one way to kind of taking that serverless model and ensure that we can take advantage of the actual platform. I'm going to just move on because we are short on time, but I'm gonna leave you with some key takeaways. Go through this process in a methodical way. Understand from previous experiences on what actually worked and what didn't work. We at AWS work with many customers and partners to make sure that we address those concerns. And we've seen failures before, and the great thing is that we have been able to learn from those failures and come up with guidance, so the next customer doesn't have to fail. So I encourage your teams to explore our quick starts and our AWS prescriptive guidance, or APG, resources. The majority of times what you're looking for is going to be there, whether that's going to be migration strategies, guides, patterns, or deployment guides. So I encourage you to review that. And then provide the structure around the process so you can ensure that you have a smooth migration experience and migration at scale without running into impediments or blockers. You can also find some people that are passionate about working in the cloud, and you can start developing your CCOE or your cloud capabilities that will drive the process and build up that momentum that you need. And the last key takeaway is that we encourage learning by doing. So maybe a Rehost is the great way to get started, but make sure that there is a solid discovery plan in place that takes the 7 Rs, into account when we do a discovery. That is pretty much all I have. So Jay, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Excellent. No, I thought that was great. So that brings us to our next poll question. So based on your business case, which migration approaches suits your company the best? This is a multi-select, so certainly depending on the application or scenario, you may have multiple, but we'd love to get your feedback on what you've heard and which of these scenarios fit your use case. So we'll leave this up for just a second and then move on to a couple of real world applications that Ed can talk about. All right, so we've got relocate, rehost, replatform, refactor, even a retire in here. So again, of these 7 Rs, the use case is going to be very widespread. So understanding which use case is important for you is definitely going to be critical as you move forward in your migration process. So Ed, I'd like to move it over to you where we can talk about Ebates and the migration that ClearScale performed for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ebates, they actually now call Rakuten. When you shop through the website, when you click on the link from the website, they receive a commission from your purchase, and in turn, they share a portion of that commission with you. So I'm personally a big fan. If you're not already shopping with them or through them, you're kind of leaving money on the table. But in any case, so what the challenge that they had was that they were outgrowing their on-premise infrastructure and just didn't have any elasticity needed to enable smooth customer experiences as they started launching their portal and really started really going after market shares in that space. So what ClearScale have done was we developed an entire new infrastructure in the cloud, which included DevOps automations and Kubernetes for their container orchestration. And so as a result, Ebates can now fully implement the implement fully automated version control configuration deployments and management through every single phase of the development cycle, so they can move faster and know that that there's no human errors that can be introduced into those processes, as well as they can grow however quickly they can, because AWS has almost infinite amount of resources for them to use. The next case study we have is for CareMetx. CareMetx is a healthcare management platform that is dedicated to supporting the patient's journey by providing hub services, innovating technology and decision-making data to pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical devices innovators. So the challenge they had was that they need to build out a new HIPAA-compliant AWS environment, but they had no time nor bandwidth to do that in a reasonable timeline. So they've engaged with ClearScale to develop, again, a lot of automations to build out the entire environment, set up a new deployment pipeline, very much in the same vein as Ebates, so they can run faster and more precisely, and be able. And then we finally migrated their on-premise infrastructure to the cloud. So as a result, CareMetx now has full control over its machines and configurations through its highly available, secure, and compliant environments. And then lastly, I think we just want to talk about what ClearScale can bring to the table in terms of migration offering. So you've heard about the various phases of migrations today. I've talked about MRA, or migration readiness assessment earlier, which generally takes about a day. It could be shortened to a couple of hours. It really varies depending on the size of your organization and how many people would be involved or would need to be involved to get a holistic picture of that assessment, but generally about a day. And in that, we identify the challenges as mentioned, strengths and weaknesses of your organization, establish capability gaps so we can solve those either after MRA, before MRP, or during the MRP itself, determine your readiness, and then determine next steps, as I just mentioned. Then I also talked about MRP, or migration planning, in this slide, migration planning readiness. It takes about 4+ weeks. It could be longer. I'm working with the customers right now that it's going to take about 16 weeks, so about 8 sprints, because they are a fairly large organization and there is a lot for us to discover. And in this planning phase, we would establish business cases to talked about earlier, so that you know what you will gain or you will shed as a result of the migration. Be able to forecast your TCO and ROI. We're going to do some pilot migrations. I talked about patterns earlier, as well as Jonathan, where you categorize your applications into patterns, and if we know how to migrate those patterns, we can repeat those processes over and over again at scale. And then finally, establish readiness for scale migration, which is the last in this slide, migration execution, or you might hear it as migration at scale. And that timeline is it will absolutely vary based on how big your organization is and how many applications there are for us to migrate. So for that large migration at scale, we've already done it in the MRP, so we know how to do it now. Optimize your applications if we're able, if the patterns allow us to do that. And then, of course, optimize your process as we go as well. As Jonathan has said, learn by doing. So as we go, we're going to refine the processes. We're going to refine how you operate until at the very end, you can, you become cloud experts and own your solutions or your workloads in the cloud.
Excellent. So that brings us to the Q&A portion of today's webinar. And we'll try to make these quick because I know we are short on time. But how do I determine the appropriate migration strategy for each application? Sid, this seems up your alley.
Yes. So basically, I think you have the 7 R's and you have a lot of tools that are at your disposal for AWS. And the reason you have these is you can look at your specific scenario. So when you are trying to migrate, look at the goals for migration, look at the business case, right? You are starting to do a deeper dive and you come out of the MRA and you're like, okay, I need to migrate X amount of workloads to AWS so I can cut cost by a certain factor, or I have this really, difficult to upgrade mainframe system or some kind of workload that I really need to modernize because I'm not able to keep up with the features that I need to deliver to my business, in order for our competitive edge. So depending on what your pain point here really is, you are going to choose a strategy that's going to let you accomplish your business outcome. Understand that if you're going with relocate, rehost, or even Replatform to some extent. Those are going to be your speedier migration patterns, which will let you move to AWS, start leveraging the elasticity and some of the shared security model where AWS takes care of the security in the cloud, like Jonathan mentioned before, so that you start leveraging those cloud benefits. And if you're willing to put in more effort because there's items that are core to your business, and by refactoring it, you not only reduce costs, but you're actually able to get the full benefit of the cloud by going serverless, by using DynamoDB, by using DAX or accelerators, and using other technologies that you can then pad on using API gateway. Then by all means, look into it and build a migration plan around those, or build a modernization plan, I would rather say, for your application around those, and look at refactoring.
Excellent. Well, I know we do have a couple of other questions on deck, but certainly feel free to reach out to Jonathan, Sid, Ed, or myself, and we'll get you an answer. But we are up against the clock at this point. So should you have any other additional questions, please schedule a consultation with our solutions architects by simply reaching out to sales@clearscale.com. A couple of great follow-ups to today: migrations. Clients share top 10 lessons learned on September 24th. This is going to be one to look out for. It's going to be 2+ hours as we dive into real-world applications, talk to AWS, Cloud Chomp, and more. These invitations will be going out very soon. We've also got some great webinars coming up on AWS Aurora, database freedom, and moving mission-critical databases to AWS. Again, a very generous thank you to Sid, Jonathan, and Ed for taking the time with today's event, and sincerely hope to work with each of you very soon again. Also, thank you to all the attendees. We hope to see you at more of these webinars, and we hope that you have a great rest of your week. So we look forward to discussing migrations with you again soon, and please contact us when you need questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.